Hello, fifth graders, welcome back. We are going to be talking about a couple more drawing tricks today that you can use to make your drawings even better. The first one I'd like to talk to you about is something that has to do with the base surface of your sculpture. Now, depending on how you constructed it, how you put your objects together, you may or may not have a base surface, but I'd like to show you some things about that base surface in case you do. This is an example from a group of kids here at school, so it's probably bigger than something you would have made at home. But it's an example of a sculpture that was created by 4 or 5 fifth graders. Now this main box is what I mean by the base, and the surface here that everything is sitting on is what I will call the base surface. The first thing I'd like you to notice is if this sculpture was sitting in front of you like this, you would see horizontal lines as part of that base surface, okay? In order to draw that, you would draw something like this. And then if you saw the left side or the right side, you would draw that side as well. So let's say that we saw the left side of the box. In other words, you were looking at it like this, so you would see this main front surface and that left side. Then you would sight your angle, right? Close one eye, tip your pencil till it matches the angle of the object you're trying to draw, and then sketch in that side of that base. Now it looks unfinished right now because it is unfinished. We're missing a side over here and we're missing the back. In order to complete those, I could just draw lines that are parallel to the other edges I've drawn already, and that would be a good base surface to start with. Sometimes I choose not to draw those back edges right away because a lot of our objects are going to be in the way anyhow. You'll just have to erase a lot of that line later. But if you want to draw it to get started, that's totally fine. So another possible option, you may see that base surface, the base instead from a corner. If I hold this sculpture like this, you're seeing the corner closest to you, and there are no horizontal lines. Like there are no lines that kind of match my arm right now on that base at all. This line is vertical, this line goes up and away, and this line goes up and away on the other side. If that's the case, then what you will see is that main vertical line in the middle, and then the two sides going in opposite, slightly angled directions. And in order to finish that, if it makes sense to help you see it better, that would look something like that, okay? Seeing that base surface from a corner. As you are doing your drawing work, I think maybe I'll just leave that corner example there. Sometimes people put the objects all along the front edge, okay? In other words, they draw everything coming right up to this edge or right up to this edge. And as you can see in this particular sculpture, this rectangular prism does line up right with that edge, but nothing on this side does. And so when you're drawing, I'd like you to pay attention to that. I'm going to set this sculpture here so that I can see it and sketch a couple things on here the way that they actually are in that sculpture. When I look at the corner here, nothing is right in the corner, okay? There's a rectangular prism here that shows up a little ways away from the corner, so that would be the first portion of it. And then it stretches backwards. That would finish our rectangular prism there. But you'll notice there's space here in my drawing because there's space there in the example, in the sculpture itself. There's a cone a little ways away from this rectangular prism, and the cone also has space between the bottom of it and that front edge of the sculpture base. And then there's a cylinder on this back corner or near this back corner, but it too does not sit right up to that front edge. There is space there between the front edge and those objects. Another thing that is related to that kind of space is how these objects relate to one another on the sculpture itself. Right now, each of these is in their own spot on here because that's how those three objects are on the sculpture itself. But there's a tape roll behind this cylinder here. Let me see if I can get that tape roll kind of sketched in there. And you'll notice it looks like that tape roll is kind of cut off by the cylinder because it is. It's sitting behind a portion of the cylinder. So as you're doing your drawing work, pay attention to what is in front of or what is behind other objects and draw those the way that you're seeing them in your sculpture. The last thing I'd like to show you for today is cones, okay? You may or may not have a cone in your sculpture. This is an example of a cone. Sometimes cones are a little wider at the base. They come to just a point, but this is one example of a cone. And drawing a cone, especially if it's just sitting on the base surface of your sculpture, is actually quite easy. They look basically like a triangle with a curve on the bottom, okay? Sometimes you can see into a cone. If I held this cone like this, you'd be able to see into it. In that case, there's an oval here at the top, and then those kind of triangle sides go down, and there's a little curve here at the bottom because it doesn't come to a point, this particular cone. So that would be drawn more like this. And if it was tipped a little more towards you, you'd see more of that opening and less of those triangle lines. If it was tipped even more, you'd see more of that opening and less of those triangle lines. And the more it's tipped, the more of that inside part you see. So however you see a cone sitting, that's how I'd like you to draw it, okay? See if you can represent what you're actually seeing in the cone. For your drawing work this week, I'd like you to add a couple objects from your house to your still life. So keep your still life like it has been. Keep everything taped the way that you've got it taped. But I'd like you to grab maybe a can of soup and a box of brownie mix or something like that, a carton of something from the fridge, and make sure you put it back when you're done. Grab 2 or 3 extra objects and set them in your sculpture somewhere so that when you do your drawing this week, you have a little bit more to look at and work with, and continue to do that great sighting work, paying attention to what angle those lines are. Watch for parallel lines as you're doing your drawing work. That's going to be really helpful to keep your drawings accurate. And watch proportions as well. If I made this cylinder 3 times that big, it would be way too big compared to the other objects in that drawing. And so that's what proportion is if you remember those size relationships, okay? Work hard. I'm excited to see your drawings, and thanks so much for all your work.